Chapter 92. The Harsh Interrogation. The Indian police wagon was like one of those iron-caged trucks which the zoo workers use to bring in dangerous wild beasts such as tigers, lions, hyenas, wolves, and the like. When Inez climbed the iron-caged wagon, she found it was so crowded with the inmates of the dark dungeon. The suspects brought with them the nasty odor of the dark room, and hence the smell in the windowless wagon was horrendous. Inez was forced to squeeze herself between two huge policewomen. The wagon had immediately left after Inez entered it. It went out of that police station into the busy streets of Bombay. Inez had no slight idea where they were taking them, except that the four huge policewomen meant evil for them. The difficult circumstances in which Inez found herself didn't allow her to think of her husband Joseph, her daughter Grace, and the loving Alexander family. She was continuously worrying about what she was experiencing in that dungeon. Now after they took her out, she began to think about what was going to happen to her and to those who helped her, if the Bombay police would discover the way she returned to India. While the wagon was running, her eyes were looking through the iron net to the busy streets of Bombay. Although she had spent long time in Bombay, but she had never seen those dirty and miserable-looking people who were roaming aimlessly in the narrow lanes and filthy open gutters. As if she was brought to a different city. Not the beautiful city in which she had spent the best days of her life with her lover Joseph in that paradise-like seashore. Those poverty and hunger-stricken Indians looked like they were living in big open jail. They were born to suffer and die miserable death in the streets like stray dogs being abandoned by their owners. Their children were emaciated and looked like walking skeletons. They were born yesterday and today they were dying. They had nothing to play with. They were beggars and thieves. If they didn't beg and steal, they would starve to death. Their small girls were prostitutes. They were forced to practice sex before they understood what was sex. It took 1.5 hours for that moving prison to reach its final destination. All the detainees were either pushed down or dragged out of the wagon by the four ruthless policewomen. When Inez was pulled out and pushed down, the first thing that attracted her attention was the name of the place where she had been brought to. She saw written in big capital letters, Tana Central Prison. The Tana Central Jail used to be a fort, Tankila, or Hurcote. The Portuguese ruled Tana for over 200 years, from 1530 to 1739. During this period, Tana was known as Kazabita Tana. Construction of the Tana Killa, fort, was started in 1730 AD. In 1737, the Maratha general Khimaji Appa planned the conquest of Vasai, Portuguese Bakame, and on March 28, 1738, the Marathas conquered the Tana Killa. The fort is presently being used as Tana Central Jail. Inez heard many bad stories about that prison. Recently, she read in the local newspaper, a Somali foreign student was murdered by some Indian inmates inside that notorious prison. It was the place where many notorious criminals were hanged, many famous politicians were tortured to death, and many innocent people were falsely accused and imprisoned for many years. Some prisoners had died before they could finish half of their terms. Many prisoners came out of that jail mentally and psychologically sick. Young girls and boys were raped by their police guards and fellow prisoners. Some people went inside innocent and came out criminals. Some young single girls went inside virgins and came out either pregnant or with 1 or 2 babies. Inez once again wished that she was dead and gone than alive to enter such a dangerous place. She thought a Sudanese ghost house might have been a better dungeon for her than that notorious jail. She asked herself, why God did not intervene and save her from being unjustly arrested. Inez's eyes were flooding with tears when the huge policewoman grabbed her hand and pulled her inside the jail premises. She was the same one who threatened to make her kiss her feet and pee in her underwear. What an evil woman to threaten an innocent girl like her with those filthy words. The policewoman took her through a small and very narrow passage. They had to bow their heads to pass through the entrance. When they entered inside the jail, Inez was given a sheet of paper and asked to read it. The paper was containing the charge which had been written by the international airport police officer who arrested her. She then was taken to a small room. 2 of the 4 huge policewomen had accompanied her to that small room. There she had been forcibly tied to a wooden chair. Before they tied her up, they stripped out her t-shirt and jeans. She was left only in her underwear and bra. Inez began to panic, thinking that they had prepared her for someone to come and rape her. After that, the 2 policewomen switched off the lights and left. The small room became pitch dark. Inez had opened her eyes as wide as she could, but she couldn't see even her body. She was engulfed by horrifying darkness. Such pitch darkness reminded her of some religious stories, which she learned in school about the sufferings in the grave. She was told that the grave was so dark that one could not see his own hand even if he stuck it to his eyes. After that, the 2 interrogating angels, Munkar and Nikir, would suddenly appear before her eyes in shining clothes. The first question they would ask her, "Who is your Lord?" If she says any other name than Allah, they would hit her across her head. Their blow is so powerful that it would cause her to sink deep in the earth. They would put their hands and pull her out. Then they would ask her, "Who is your prophet?" If she mentions any other name than the beloved of Allah, the master of creation, Muhammad ibn Kilab, they would hit her even harder than before. This time, their powerful blow would cause her to sink the distance of 200 years inside the earth. Like before, they would dig her out and continue their harsh interrogation technique. After that, they would ask her, "How was your relation with your neighbor?" Any negative answer would send her again beneath the earth. She should not try to fool them, for every bad deed she had done in her life was written in her left shoulder and every good deed in her right shoulder. If she failed their exam, they would hand her over to the bald-headed snake. The length of that terrible snake was a journey of 1,000 years. It would continuously bite and torture her until the day of judgment. Inez had remained half an hour wondering who would come to her first, the rapists or the grave angels. After half an hour none of those had come except the police extortionists. If she knew how evil the extortionists were, she would have preferred the other 2 groups even if they had to come all together and simultaneously rape her and torture her. After half an hour the door of the grave-like room was suddenly sprang open. Inez had seen some dark shadows slowly crept in. The dark shadows had also remained her of ghosts. She thought she might have been cast into one of those ghosts' houses she heard about. When the door was shut again, she began to hear voices whispering to one another. Even though the door was closed, she knew the ghosts didn't leave. Their evil presence and whispers were hunting the dark tomb and creating shockingly dreadful panic in her heart. She was now opening her eyes as wide as possible trying to see those scary ghosts, but she couldn't see them. While her eyes were thus widely open, Inez felt suddenly a powerful flash of light like tongues of fire attacking her eyes. Unbearable pain swept over her eyes and entered her body. If someone had stabbed her eyes with a sharp knife or thrown hot chili powder in her eyes, he wouldn't have given her so much pain as she was experiencing now. She began to scream loudly. While she was screaming she heard the ghosts laughing. She tried to use her hands to subside the pain, but she couldn't because her hands were tied up. Even though her eyes remained tied closed, still she continued to feel the intensified light passing through her eyes. Its heat and brightness were burning her face like hot iron. While Inez was turning her head right and left, trying to avoid the burning light, she heard the ghosts speaking to her in human language. "Listen, you dirty prostitute," a harsh voice spoke to her. Inez immediately recognized the voice to be none other than the voice of that huge policewoman who had threatened her inside the dark dungeon. "We have no time to waste with you. We have many more other suspects to interrogate. Tell us, how did you return to India?" The Indian policewoman who began to interrogate Inez was a Hindu woman. But, she was a secret mistress to the new head of the Bombay CID. Ralph Wolfe, when he learned about the arrest of the Sudanese apostate girl whom he had extradited to Sudan, at once he contacted his Hindu mistress and ordered her to interrogate her. He didn't want Inaz to be interrogated by Muslim female police officers because Hindu police officers might accuse them of religious bias. He also told his mistress what words she had to put in Inaz's mouth through her cruel interrogation method. Even though she couldn't see her image, Inaz still recollected the huge body of the man who had masqueraded himself as a woman. Therefore, before that evil woman carried out her threat, Inaz decided to be very careful in answering her questions so that she could possibly avoid the wrath of that ruthless woman. I had returned to India through the New Delhi International Airport. Why there is no record of your return in any Indian international airport's computer? Listen, you dirty prostitute, I am warning you in advance. If you give us any false information, you would pay high price for it. We are going to investigate any information you give us. Inaz was in a fixed state. She knew she had returned under someone's name. The policewoman had already told her there is no record of her entry. Maybe due to some human errors, my return to India wasn't recorded in the computer. That is lie. Besides, your name has been blacklisted by the head of the CID. There is no way you can convince us you have come back to India through illegal means. Therefore, tell us, how did you smuggle yourself and who helped you to escape from Qatar and return to India? I didn't smuggle myself and no one had helped me to do so. Inaz felt a heavy rod hit her back. It had caused so much pain that she felt as if a burning iron touched her naked body. She began to scream and struggle violently to free herself from the ropes. Her struggle was in vain. Another strike fell on the same spot and caused more unbearable pain. A third strike, a fourth strike, a 10th strike. The person who was beating her had gone into a frenzy rage and was showering her naked body by many strikes. Inaz was shouting and trying desperately to prevent the painful floggings from falling on her back. It seemed that the screaming of Inaz had drawn her torturer extremely mad. "Shut up your mouth, you dirty prostitute," the harsh voice shouted again. "If you don't close your mouth, I will rip off your skin." Inaz was forced to stop shouting. Her body was sweating and bleeding. Every part of her body was shaking and shivering. She was feeling her back and shoulders were set on fire. The fire was burning her body even though she could neither see it nor smell it. She was like swimming in hot molten lava. "I am repeating my question again. How did you smuggle yourself inside the Indian soil and who helped you to escape from Qatar?" "I just ran out of the hotel in Doha City." This time Inaz felt a hand grabbed her hair and pulled it up. She felt as if her head skin was peeled off and her hair was ripped off. If the evil policewoman continued to pull up her hair, she might have broken her neck as well. While she was struggling to rescue her neck from being broken by the ruthless Indian woman, Inaz felt a cricket bat-like hand hit her face. Every tooth in her mouth began to bleed. Her nose bone was broken and she could no more breathe normally. Her nose was running down blood like a tap running down hot water. Her mouth couldn't help her to breathe normally. She felt she had been suffocated and she was going to die any moment. For a few seconds, her soul was trying to leave her body. A very cold water was poured on her naked body. It was either a kind of torture or a mercy killing or even keeping her alive so she could be tortured again and again until she confessed everything. "If you keep lying to us, we will torture you to death. How did you smuggle yourself inside the Indian soil and who helped you to escape from Qatar?" This time Inaz didn't answer the persisting question. One of the extortionists lit a candle and began to burn the naked flesh of Inaz. Another one had threatened to pluck off her nails. The painful burning sensation made her to scream louder. Her shouting voice had irritated the man in woman's clothing and hence she roared like an angry lioness and held Inaz's hair again and pulled her towards her huge chest. That man in woman's body had 2 breasts as big as 2 soccer balls. Therefore, Inaz's head, nose, mouth, ears, and face were buried inside the chest and the two breasts balls of the man-woman. She felt that the elephant woman wanted to kill her through suffocation. Inaz had almost died before the woman released her face. It was more cruel, harsh method of interrogation than waterboarding. The evil policewomen had repeated 5 times that cruel and inhumane harsh method of extracting information from a suspect. Every time, Inaz felt as if the huge woman wanted to press her face on her chest and kill her in that cruel way. The man-woman's body was perspiring as if she was in sauna. Her sweat went inside Inaz's nose each time she pulled her to her chest and 2 balls boobs. Her body was smelling terribly, as if she hadn't washed it for months. It was the most cruel experience that a human being could ever go through. Even the hardened hearts terrorists of the Islamic State or Al-Qaeda have not yet invented such a cruel torture to kill their victims. The ISIS terrorists beheaded, burned, caged, and buried alive their victims, but what that elephant woman had done to Inez was 5 times more cruel than those of ISIS. It would be better to kill a person through strangling or suffocation than to do that to a helpless victim as Inez. After all those tortures, a powerful slap hit Inaz's right cheek. Her chin was dislocated and her ears were deafened. Meanwhile, the burning candle resumed the torture and this time began to move upwards and downwards on her naked back. Also, she began to feel a sharp needle or nail had been inserted between her fingernail and flesh. This last kind of torture had forced Inaz to speak out. "Stop torturing me, I will tell you everything." All forms of torture stopped instantly. "Speak out and speak quickly and truthfully." Someone from Lebanon came to my room in the hotel at Doha City and told me to disguise myself as a boy and run out of the hotel. He then cut my hair short and gave me a trouser and shirt and asked me to put them on. He then promised to meet me outside the hotel and assist me further. Inaz's boyish haircut confirmed her words before she finished her confession. "What is his name?" He said his name is Vijay Alexander. "Why did he help you?" He said he is helping me because I have forsaken Islam and become a Christian like him. Okay, we don't care about who he was. Just tell us, how did you return to India? After I had escaped from the hotel, he met me outside and introduced me to his wife Teresa Alexander. What happened next? He told me I can use his wife's passport and flee out of the state of Qatar. They wanted to send me to their relatives in Beirut, but I told them, I want to go back to my husband and daughter in Bombay. Then they took me to a place and got a passport-size photo of me taken. After that, they took me to a Somali man who knew how to change photos in passports. You mean he was a forger? Yes, ma'am. He removed the photo of Teresa and replaced it with my photo. After that, they applied online for an Indian visiting visa for me. We have got the visa at the same time and printed out. After that, they booked my flight from Doha to Bombay through an Indian travelling agency. So, you have admitted that you have returned to India under someone else's name and you have used a forged travelling document to come to Bombay. Yes, ma'am. Where is that forged passport now? I burned it as soon as I reached my apartment. The Lebanese couple who gave it to me told me to get rid of it immediately after my arrival in India. We are going to check the computer of the Bombay International Airport and also we are going to check the recorded videos of the surveillance cameras at the airport. We are going to investigate every confession you have made. If we can't verify your confessions, we will interrogate you again. Next time, we are not going to be so nice with you as we have been today. What I have told you is the truth, ma'am. Untie her and put on her clothes. Chapter 93. The Second Interrogation. The outcome of the harsh interrogation incensed Mr. Ralph Wolf into extreme anger. He wanted to involve either the Americans or the Jews or both, but not unknown Lebanese couple. His heart was set on fire when he learned that every confession Inaz had made had been confirmed through the police investigation at the international airport. There were videos showing her arrival at the Bombay Chhatrapati International Airport and also her return was verified through the computer's recording of the passengers' entries. Nonetheless, the investigation could not go beyond the day of her arrival. There was no way to prove or disprove her claims that a Lebanese couple had assisted her in escaping from the hotel or had forged a passport which facilitated her return, although her name had been blacklisted. The Indian court could convict her on the grounds of her confessions that through forgery and false identity she returned to Bombay. But, Mr. Ralph Wolf anticipated that any smart lawyer of the UN could put hold on any conviction of a refugee in India. It was well-known fact that refugees all over the world use false and forged documents to escape from their dictatorship regimes or run away from their poverty-stricken or war-torn countries. Every week thousands of Arabs and Africans put themselves in high risk and pay thousands of dollars to the human traffickers to smuggle them in boats across the Mediterranean Sea. When they arrived on the European shores, they were received as victims rather than criminals, and each one of them would be granted refugee status, and soon he would be sent for resettlement in the New World. Accordingly, Mr. Ralph Wolf understood that if the Sudanese apostate girl's case became public knowledge and the media people poked their noses into it, she would be acquitted in honor, and very soon she and her family would be flown to Canada. Before such thing would happen, the wicked Ralph Wolf decided to abduct and slay the sheep before another Sam sheepdog would come along and rescue her from him. He spent a restless night trying to come up with a new flawless plot. He wanted to destroy her without having her blood in his hands. He knew he could hire Hindu Gondas and send them to murder her if she wasn't under his custody. He also knew he could send his Hindu mistress and order her to torture the Sudanese apostate girl to death. But, the UN and other international human rights and women's rights organizations might put pressure on the Indian government and investigate her death, and through his Hindu mistress he would be dragged in. Finally, after cracking his evil brain throughout the night, Ralph Wolf decided to force Inez to alter her confessions. He wanted to build up a foolproof case against her. A strong case with a criminal charge that no lawyer in the world could stop her from going to prison. He knew only a murder charge or drugs-related charge could send her either to the gallows or behind bars for the rest of her life. In accordance, the evil man attended in person the second interrogation of the detainee Inez. He had already contacted his Hindu mistress and shared his wicked scheme with her. The evil duo, like two bad-omen birds, a crow and an owl, haunted the small interrogation room and began to carry their worst interrogation method on the apostate girl. After repeatedly subjecting their suspect to that cruel chest-boarding enhanced harsh interrogation technique, Ralph Wolf informed Inez that she had lied in her confessions. According to him, the police investigation at the Bombay International Airport revealed that she had returned to India under an Indian passport and not a Lebanese passport. Inez could not find a proper answer to that tricky question. She didn't want to reveal whose passport she used. Nonetheless, Ralph Wolf saved her the trouble when he falsely claimed that, through the Indian police intelligence, he was able to identify the Lebanese couple who assisted her through bribery and forgery. He said, Vijay Alexander and his wife Teresa Alexander were notorious drugs traffickers who were already known to every narcotics enforcement police officer in Bombay. They weren't Lebanese Christians, but they were Indian Christians who were originally from Madras city. But apparently, they had deceived her by concealing their true identities and falsely claiming to be Arabs. Now Ralph Wolf wanted to know why those Indian drugs lords helped a girl who was unknown to them and also of no use to them. Inez knew the whole theory was built on lies. Nonetheless, to avoid dragging the real Alexanders into her charge, she feigned to be clueless of their ulterior motives. Having dragged her legs thus far, after that Ralph Wolf began to reveal his evil scheme. He told Inez that the narcotics police of Bombay was able to unearth the wicked deal she made with those notorious overseas Indian criminals. They took advantages of her helpless situation and proposed to help her escape from Qatar and assist her to return to India. But, in return for their services, she had to help them once or twice in their drugs trafficking between Bombay and Doha. According to him, Inez being facing life threat and found no other way out from her helpless situation, she accepted the wicked deal. Nevertheless, Mr. Vijay Alexander wanted to ensure that she wouldn't double-cross them when she was safely back in India. He then told her that he would not give her the forged passport and send her to Bombay unless she would agree first to have sex with him, and that should be done under a video shooting. The video would be shown to her husband and also be uploaded on the internet if she would refuse to fulfill her promise. Even though Inaz refused to bend to their threat and also refused to agree for sex. Then Mr. Vijay Alexander threatened to inform some Muslim terrorist groups about her hiding place. This new life threat forced Inaz to accept his conditions and therefore allowed him to have sex with her. Of course, Inaz tried desperately to deny all those false allegations, but every time the woman in man's body muffled her voice through her soccer ball's boobs. She then would suffocate her through pressing her face to her huge chest until Inaz would accept the false charge. All those admissions were recorded as evidence to be used against her in court. After that, the two Evil Crow and Owl produced photos of a Muslim young woman who wrapped her entire body from head to feet with black burqa, which made her look like the wife of Satan the devil. They then said, the burqa woman was Inez herself. The photos showed the black female creature in various locations in Bombay. Some photos showed the black burqa woman coming out of the apartment of Inez in Kalina, other photos while she was standing and receiving a handbag from an Afghani old man at Bandra Fair Steps, and yet other photos while she was sitting on a bench at Bandra local train station and giving the same handbag to a black African young man. The head of the CID claimed that some of the Bombay narcotics police officers followed the African foreign student to his apartment at Andheri. After a couple of hours they raided his apartment and found with him other 2 African boys and 3 African girls. They were in the process of preparing the drugs in small capsules and swallowing them. They were all about to fly to the Middle East on the same day. They were arrested and the capsules were removed from their bodies. After forcing her to admit those false accusations, the evil Ralph Wolf decided to make his own wicked deal with his victim. He knew that Inaz had become a helpless prey in his hands. So, he said to her, he could understand her problem and why she agreed to compromise in her honor at Doha City and took part in the drug smuggling at Bombay. He further said, any girl in her helpless situation would agree for those unfair conditions in order to escape from those fanatic Muslim Arabs who gathered around her hotel and wanted to shed her blood. He made a lips promise that he wasn't going to bring in court those photos of her which proved that she took part in drug smuggling. He further said to her, if those strong proofs were shown to the judge of the criminal court, she would be given a maximum sentence of 19 years imprisonment under hard labor. In that case, she was going to be separated from her husband and daughter forever. He then frightened her by telling her that it was a common occurrence in the Indian jails that foreign convicts were killed by their Indian inmates. He said to her, each and every Indian suffers from xenophobia. So, being a foreigner, Inaz should not expect to survive more than a year in any Indian central prison. Having filled her heart with indescribable fear and intimidation, the evil Ralph Wolf said to his victim, but, if you will accept my deal, I will suppress all those accumulated evidence of drug smuggling against you, and I will send you to the criminal court with the charges of forgery and stealing someone's identity. The judge may give you 2 to 4 years jail term. But, with the good conduct you may walk out a free woman through parole after a year. Chapter 94. The Wicked Deal. Inaz believed the lies of the new head of the CID and therefore allowed him to get from her what he wanted. As a matter of fact, Inaz put her honor at the stake in order to protect the honor and reputation of the people who risked their lives and rescued her from those Muslim terrorists and brought her on wings of eagle to her husband and baby. She weighed the pros and cons and on that basis she agreed to compromise in her honor. She understood that her evil interrogators had fabricated evidence against her and with those strong proofs they could send her behind bars forever. The only way to escape from those malicious accusations, she had to tell the court who were the true Alexanders who forged her passport and helped her to escape from the hotel at Doha and return to her family in India. But, Inaz had already made up her mind that, if the Indian policeman had to rape her 100 times, or cut her body in pieces, she wouldn't betray her best friend Teresa, and her brother in Christ, Mr. Vijay Alexander. Accordingly, she accepted the wicked deal of the evil man Rafe Wolf. By the way, the real name of that wicked lawless man was Aslam Noor al-Haq. Aslam means the person who embraced the religion of peace, and Noor al-Haq means the light of truth. However, that evil man was supposed to be named the Prince of Darkness or the Evil One. Therefore, we will continue calling him Ralph Wolf. The evil man videotaped his evil act with his victim Inaz and threatened to use it against her, if she changed her words in court. He put on his face a mask while he was raping her. His Hindu mistress was the one who shot the video. He then told his sex victim, he would bring the video in court and he would say the man with her in the video was the notorious drugs trafficker Vijay Alexander. Since he was an Indian and the notorious criminal an Indian too, the Bombay Criminal Court would believe the story of the narcotics police and sentence her to life. Nevertheless, Ralph Wolf had determined to punish Inaz for her apostasy and her challenge to his authority. He considered her return to India and her frustration of his plan to extradite her to Sudan was a challenge to his authority. After preparing more than enough evidence against Inaz, which he knew would give her 19 years prison term under hard labor, the evil man contacted the Sudanese embassy. He proposed a plan to release his Muslim brother Mr. Ahmed Salah and send him back to Sudan. He raped his daughter Inaz and called him his Muslim brother. Ralph Wolf told the Sudanese embassy to make an official undertaking to the Bombay Jail Authority that they want their convicted citizen Mr. Ahmed Salah to spend the rest of his jail term in a Sudanese prison at Khartoum City. He even drafted the undertaking and sent it to them. He just asked them to sign it and put the embassy stamp on it and then send it back to him. As soon as he received it back, he forwarded it to the Bombay Jail Authority. In less than a week, the tyrant and murderer Mr. Salah Ahmed was transferred from the Arthur Road Central Prison to the Chhatrapati International Airport and flown in a direct flight to his fatherland. At the Khartoum International Airport, he was received as a great hero by the big man, the former emir of the Muslim Brotherhood in Pune city. Through the recommendation of the biggest police authority in Khartoum, the proud and arrogant Sudanese lawyer was awarded the honorable title of the righteous son of Sudan. In the Muslim world, that title has more honor than the title of the person who received the Nobel Peace Prize. Looking ahead to the life of Mr. Salah Ahmed, he eventually became the Minister of Justice in the Democratic Republic of Sudan. Meanwhile, Mr. Vijay Alexander didn't leave a stone unturned while he was trying to exonerate Inaz from that charge of returning to India even though her name had been blacklisted by the Bombay CID police. All those police officers he contacted were having no power to change or intervene in a case being handled by the head of the Bombay CID. When all his efforts yielded nothing, he approached the church leadership and requested them to appoint a lawyer for Inaz. Mr. Alexander could appoint 3 lawyers for Inaz, but knowing that he was also involved, his wife advised him not to do so. Even his sister backed the wise advice of her sister-in-law. In fact, Mr. Vijay and his sister Teresa had expected the Bombay police to come and arrest them on the same day Inaz was arrested at the international airport. However, after 1 week passed and no Indian cop showed up, they understood that Inaz remained faithful to her promise and didn't involve them with her charge. The church leadership accepted the request of Mr. Vijay Alexander and appointed an advocate to defend a sister in Christ. Nevertheless, Joseph Abraha had come up with a different suggestion for the defense of his beloved wife. He left his baby Grace under the care of Alexander family and travelled to New Delhi. Upon his arrival, he took a taxi directly to the UN office and informed Inaz's new legal representative about the arrest of his wife and the reason behind her detention. The legal representative assured him that the UN office would appoint a lawyer for his wife's defense. He also told him that what his wife had done wasn't a serious crime. He further said, many refugees used illegal means to escape their desperate situations. After receiving that assurance and a promise of a lawyer, Joseph went directly to the railway station and caught the Rajdhani evening train heading back to Bombay. A week from the day of his return, Joseph received a phone call from the UN lawyer of his wife Inaz. The lawyer said to him, he was going to meet his wife in a couple of days and invited him to come for the appointment. Joseph wasn't allowed to see his wife from the day she was arrested. The Bombay police refused to tell him in which jail she was kept. Therefore, he immediately agreed to come after 2 days and meet his wife. Through the UN lawyer, he came to know that his wife was detained in Thane Central Prison. From Kalina to Thane, Joseph would need to travel by 2 local trains, 1 bus and 1 rickshaw to reach the dungeon where his wife was imprisoned in. However, the first lawyer who met Inaz and took her statement was the advocate who was appointed by the church. Inaz told him about the forgery and the identity switch charges. He also assured her that what she had done wasn't a big crime, taking into considerations the circumstances which led her to do it. Wherefore, he anticipated that with a clean criminal record she would get a shorter prison term. Shortly after that, Inaz met with her UN lawyer and her husband. It was very emotional and hard time when the lovers met inside the meeting room. Joseph couldn't believe his eyes when he saw his wife. Her face was swollen and one of her eyes was closed shut due to the cruel beatings. Her entire face was puffed up, rounded, and misshapen. It lost half of its beauty. In this short time, Inaz lost so much weight as if she hadn't eaten food from the day she was arrested. Joseph wept bitterly when he saw the miserable condition of his beloved wife. She appeared to him as the person who spent many days and nights continuously weeping and didn't sleep for very long time. He understood that, this time his wife went through more brutal and vicious beatings than the first time. The UN lawyer also assured Inaz that he would try to get her out of jail as soon as possible. He listened to her confessions and got her approval to represent her in an Indian court of law. That day, Joseph bought many food coupons on his wife's name from the jail cafeteria. His imprisoned wife wasn't allowed to receive cash inside the jail, but she could eat her 3 meals in the cafeteria. Before the jail authority allowed her husband to visit her and purchase food coupons in her name, Inaz used to get only 1 meal in the whole day. In the Indian jails and prisons, the suspect or the convict was entitled to a single meal in the day. He could eat it at one time or divide it and eat it in different times. He usually would receive once in the day 1 boiled egg and dal and rice. Dal means red lentils. Sometimes, some antisocial elements called gondas might rob the single meal from some inmates and leave them to starve the whole day. Chicken and other meat food were rarely served to the inmates. Chapter 95. The Rap Sheet. Unfortunately, Inaz lost her 2 lawyers as soon as she appeared in court and her charges sheet was read. The CID police had prepared a huge rap sheet against her which included many charges, which she didn't mention to her 2 lawyers when they met her in jail prior to her first hearing. The most serious of those new charges were her involvement in drug smuggling activity in Bombay City and her sexual intercourse with a notorious drugs dealer in Doha City. Her sex scandal had to do with her illegal return to India under fake name and forged passport. Her involvement in the drug smuggling was payback to those notorious smugglers who helped her to escape from the hotel in Doha, and after that through bribery and forgery they brought her back to India. According to the Indian police intelligence, Inaz agreed to work continuously with those drugs traffickers even after her immigration to Canada. The charge sheet included many small details that Inaz's heart almost stopped when she heard them read in court. Likewise, her husband Joseph and the Alexanders were astonished by the undeniable evidence presented in court. The head of the Bombay CID police and the Narcotics Police Department had supplied enough evidence to convict Inaz for life. The 2 lawyers understood that they would not be able to refute or deny those solid proofs, which the Bombay police had presented in court. Inaz understood that she had been badly deceived and double-crossed by those who harshly and brutally interrogated her. The promise she received after she surrendered her body to be raped by a man as old as her father was false and malicious. The wicked Muslim man abused his authority and took advantages of his helpless victim. Instead of using the law to protect and defend a terribly abused and persecuted girl as her, he wielded his authority like weapon and used it to manipulate the law and rape a defenseless foreign girl. Inez knew whatever she would do or say, wouldn't rescue her from the maximum prison sentence. Therefore, she concluded that her life was ruined and she lost her husband and child forever. She covered her face with her hands and began to weep. The pastor of her church and a few elders and brothers and sisters who happened to be among those who knew her and came to attend the first hearing. Immediately, the pastor whispered a few words in the ears of those who were sitting close to him. In response to his whispering, all the church people stood up and marched out of the courtroom like soldiers marching in a parade. In front of the courtroom, the church leadership conducted a quick meeting and collectively reached to the decision to withdraw their support. They believed the money of the church was blessed through the saints' prayers and therefore shouldn't be used to defend a backslidden sister who committed adultery and engaged in drugs activity in order to escape from a persecution. Accordingly, the pastor met with the church lawyer and informed him about the decision of the leadership and cancelled his appointment. The lawyer of the UN office also contacted his headquarters in New Delhi and updated them about the new developments in the case of the Sudanese refugee girl. The United Nations office likewise cancelled their legal aid to Inez. They told him the UN office won't defend criminals. Therefore, Inez became without any lawyer to defend her in court. Nevertheless, Inez's husband and the Alexander family met her after the hearing was over and tried to talk to her, but her guards pushed them away and took her inside their police wagon and drove away. Among all the four, Joseph was the one who was going through the most dark and difficult time in all his life. Mr. Vijay Alexander, Mrs. Mary Alexander, and Teresa Alexander were all knew Inez was innocent of the sex scandal. How could she have sex with Mr. Vijay Alexander when he didn't travel to Doha and met her in the hotel? It was Teresa who travelled all the way from India to Qatar and met Inez inside the hotel and gave her the forged passport and assisted her in escaping and returning to India. Wherefore, they were puzzled about the charge sheet which mentioned that Inez met with notorious drugs traffickers by the names of Vijay and Teresa Alexander and convinced her to have sex and help them in their drugs activities in Bombay. Moreover, how Inez would follow the orders of fictitious drugs dealers and take part in their illegal activities. For that reason, the Alexander family wanted to meet with Inez and ask her those questions, but the police guards prevented them. Unfortunately, her husband Joseph was the only one among the four who believed everything the charge sheet had mentioned about his wife. Wherefore, he was going through those difficult and hard time. He was thinking some wicked Indians took advantages of his wife's situation in Doha and helped her and then blackmailed her. They told her if she agreed to have sex with one of them then they would help her to escape and return to India. For the sake of being rescued from those Arab terrorists and returned to her husband and daughter, Inez accepted their evil terms. Most probably, thought Joseph, they used that sex video and blackmailed her in helping them in their drugs business in Bombay. Joseph was still kept in dark regarding who were the real people who planned and executed the escape and return of his wife. Nevertheless, the loving Joseph remained faithful to his wife. He understood that any person in the situation of his wife would do what she did. What troubling him not what his wife had done, but what she was going to face due to those terrible crimes she was compelled to do. He knew India had zero tolerance for drugs crimes. Indians believe that, the murderer would murder one person, the terrorist would blow up a few people, but the drugs dealer would destroy the lives of thousands of young Indians. Accordingly, Joseph concluded that, his wife was going to be separated from him and her child for many years. Nonetheless, he also knew deep down in his heart he would never leave Inez and go for another girl. Even if he had to wait for 20 years for his beloved Inez to come out of prison, he would wait for her.